Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me, as always, is Mike. Um, Mike, today we want to delve into something that I'm sure won't at all be divisive for people in the
I
comments
know.
section and things like that. And in having this, we just really want to have a conversation on about negativity in the nerd culture space of things. I think you and I both come from a place where we're not blaming any particular angle of this. I think that one thing we want to be clear on as we talk about any of this is there are legitimate criticisms and people addressing legitimate criticisms. They should be, it's absolutely vital that people make their voices heard. You absolutely have a right to complain about things when you don't like it. You absolutely have a voice that you should use. I think from the same angle, I think there are creatives and things who, at times, if people go to a level that they shouldn't have in their criticism, they naturally get defensive. And so I think what we want to dismiss right off the bat is anything that goes to the extremes, right? Anybody who says that any criticism is bad, obviously that's ridiculous. And anybody who says that goes way too far in their criticism, getting personal about the person and who they are and what their values are. I think either one of those we can kind of toss out and just say, obviously, those are bad off the bat. I think what we're mainly looking at is from the creative space of things and from the fan angle of things, has the negativity that has infested a lot of cultural stuff, comic books, movies, video games, etc. Has it become something where it's kind of destroyed what this medium and all these mediums are supposed to actually be? So I'll kind of kick it to you to start with it. When you see all the negativity that's kind of in the space of all the stuff that you and I are invested in so many of these nerdy properties, would be it Star Trek, comic books, James Bond, etc. For you, what is the impact you've seen of kind of the overabundance of negativity on the nerd culture?
I will give it a little bit of a historical perspective because I've been loving this stuff for a lot longer than probably most folks. But I will just say to for all of us to take a little bit of a step back and just appreciate the moment that we are at and the era that just ended with the huge comic book conventions. They're on the decline now across the country. They're not as big as they used to be. The wonderful run of movies that we had, from a fan perspective, as a kid, I would have never dreamed that it got to this level. For those of you who don't know, who might be younger, um, you know, being a comic book nerd, in the 70s was, people were very derisive of that. They kind of snickered and, oh, those things aren't good for you. You're rotting your brain reading those comics. Don't get me wrong. I love a good book. I just finished rereading Dune, which is also nerdy, but I love it. But to have this much stuff, action figures that I never had when I was a kid. The movies, the TV shows, the video games. I would have just, I would have been in heaven as a kid. So we got to take a step back and just appreciate that this material has, gone along generationally and it been brought to the point where it is today. But yes, being like in the nerd space, a lot of us are very critical. We like our stuff a certain way. We like lots of nerdy stuff, and we wish this was done that way and that was done this way, whatever the case may be. But to get angry about it, to me, it feels like it has a depressing effect on the material in general. And if you don't like a book, you don't have to buy it. Vote with your pocketbook, and then buy books that you do like. Reed and I highlighted all the great books that are out there today that you can try, and there's probably hundreds more that we've never tried that you would love. There's a right comic book for you.
Yeah.
But I do feel like a lot of this is driven by the algorithm. Everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon and beat down certain titles or even creators, which is, not really fair. They're making they're making a buck. Maybe the editor could have chose a different creator for this project versus that project, and it would have been better. But you can't also ignore the fact, and that this controversy came up this week, that there are folks that absolutely hate the direction a character has been put at. And on the other side, you have a second set of folks who love it. And so it's like, hey, you can put out a Batman comic. You're very fortunate that you have more than one Batman title to choose from. This is a world that we couldn't have imagined in 1970. Where you have 20 different Batman titles. Back then we only had two or three, I think, if you count Brave and the Bold. Oh, which by the way, folks, I just did get this new Brave and the Bold issue with Batman and the Flash. It's not
Mhm.
new. I mean, it's from the 60s, but how cool is that? But yeah, this stuff is meant for fun. If it's not your bag, if you're not liking it, move on to something else, and let those enjoy it. Enjoy it. You can say your 2 cents, but try not to, drive it into the ground. It's after
Yeah,
all
I think
just comic books.
so. I think there's a lot in what you say that I agree with. There's a little I disagree with, and this is where me and you have always been able to tackle things. I think from a similar angle, and then we probably have like 5% of a fraction that's a little different on some things.
Okay, go
Uh,
Reed, go.
I absolutely agree with you on. I think the negativity has mainly come out of, and look, you and I have certainly done videos on this channel where we've been negative. So I'm not going to sit here and be hypocritical and act like people who do negative videos are wrong in any way, because I do think it's really important when you don't enjoy something that you call it out, that you talk about it, that you kind of hold people's feet to the fire a little bit about, hey, you're in charge of something and you're destroying it. I think where we've gone to an issue is we've gotten to extremes on both sides. And it kind of reminds me of people are probably tired of sports analogies for me, but it kind of reminds me of sports talk radio. I've always listened to sports talk radio. The caller who gets
Oh
on the
yeah,
air
yeah,
is always the negative caller because it's the more entertaining caller, right?
yeah,
The guy who calls in and goes, the Bears lost yesterday, but they played really hard and I liked a lot of players and the coach didn't do a bad job and I really like where the team's going. That guy doesn't really get it. The guy who gets on and goes, the team sucks, the quarterback's awful, we need to ship the quarterback to Siberia, fire the
right,
owner, and get it. That's the guy who makes the radio show, right? And I
right.
think there is something culturally to that. And I think as nerd culture has become more and more prevalent, we've seen more people enter that, and we've seen more people want to, make their name known in it. And certainly, look, you and I are doing a YouTube channel. I'm not going to claim that we're not trying to get people to watch our channel either. So I think all of us have a little bit inherently in that. And I do think there's people who have seen, hey man, this negativity piece, if I go over the top a little bit, might bump up the views a bit and things like that. And I'm not going to blame anybody for trying to do that, but I do think what's happened is as we've gotten more and more people into that, you start to get people on both sides of the argument where I think you've had creators who I think are creating books in bad faith and people who are criticizing the books in bad faith. And so I think we have fans who now buy books and the entire intention of buying the book, they're not trying to enjoy it at all. Their goal is to take the page and look at every single panel and every single thing on every single page and look for anything that they can find that they can rip to pieces and then present it as the entire thing is trash. This person's an idiot and the book is awful. And look at all these little things that I found. And then I think you have on the other end, you have a lot of creatives who look at it as anybody who criticizes me is just a hater, and there's no valid criticisms of my work. And I think sometimes you even have where they take the job with the intent of kind of sticking it to the fans of the material. And I look at, we brought this up in another video, but the recent kind of Joker movie that came out, where it really felt like the director's intention was, man, if you like that first movie, you're an idiot. And I'm going to make this entire second movie to tell you why you're stupid for liking the first movie. And it's like, man, that's a really weird decision to make with a $200 million movie. But I think we see sometimes some of these creatives who come in, and we've seen this. I think the MCU is the greatest example of self-destruction I've ever seen in terms of when you look at what made the MCU work initially, you had so many people come in and talk about how they loved the comics, they loved the characters. Kevin Feige was behind a lot of that, and he was the guy. I think they said on the X-Men set he was sneaking Hugh Jackman X-Men comics to read to be more character
Yeah.
accurate to Wolverine. He had a love and appreciation for the characters. He talked about that. If you look at the early writers and the stories they were using, they were inspired by comic book runs that were popular and things like that. And then sometime around the end of Endgame, they started hiring directors and people where it was like you could tell that they would flat out say in interviews, I don't read the comics. I don't like the characters. I'm not a comic book fan. I don't like superheroes. I don't even know who the Eternals are, or I don't know who Black Widow is. And I literally just took this film because of the platform that it gives me, and I can, have $200 million to do what I want. And so I think what we've had happen is that polarization is what's actually hurt nerd culture. It's where I think there's a ton of fans who are stuck in the middle of two people who are throwing stones at each other. And I think you get creatives. I think so many times because
I
it always
feel
kind
like
of
that
kills
a
me when you
lot.
hear
I
people
feel
where they're
like
like,
that a lot.
all of DC Comics is trash or all of Marvel Comics is trash. And it's like, no, it's not. There's always 5 or 6 great DC titles. There's always 5 or 6 great Marvel titles. There may be 2 or 3 high profile ones that are bad. And as a result, you can do that. But to me, it always just seems so weird that we have such generalization. It's kind of, again, if I would watch the NFL on Sunday and I watched the Cleveland Browns play and they're awful and they stink, and I walked away and went, oh, the whole NFL is trash because of the Cleveland Browns stink. It's like, no, that's one team. It's one isolated incident that you saw there. There's probably a lot of other good things happening at the same time. And I think that polarization is really what's caused the damage is you've got, I think, a lot of good creatives and a lot of really good fans who are kind of stuck in the middle of these two extremes on both sides. And I think the people who are responsible for most of that are folks who they don't have a real love for the medium. I think it's the creatives who don't have a love for the medium, and I think sometimes it's a lot of the more vocal folks who don't seem to actually have a lot of love for the comic books. It's more they have a love for the drama. They have a love for the anger and the fighting
Ah,
and that sort of
I,
stuff. And so
I
they
see your
drum
point
up a
there.
lot of this is how real fans feel. And then you get these creatives on the other hand who probably don't like a lot of comic book fans. And those two, I think, drive so much of that polarization. And I think
So
the fans who are stuck in the middle kind of get left out.
in your analysis, there's 80%, and we'll count you and me as part of that 80%. And
I would think so, yeah.
there's 10% over here and 10% over there that are throwing stones at each other. I get that analysis, and I feel like that a lot. I feel like I'm in the middle. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, that book was terrible, but I'm still reading, whatever. And I'll give Ultimate DC a chance, all in.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Hashtag all in. I'll give it a shot. I love comics. And I don't love all comics, but I do love comics, and it's just comics. I think a lot of times, like you said, when they point out stuff, it's just like, okay, but it's a comic book. And you gotta, put aside, some of
I
your.
think one of the things you point out is like I think you said, I think there's some folks sometimes where they forget. And I think this is the creatives too. Again, I think it's where it's both sides. I hate when people blame fans, and I hate when it's all blamed on the creatives because I think it's a little bit of both. I think for fans sometimes, I remember when 2012. So I think this was when the MCU started with like the Avengers and you started getting
Right,
that faction of there's DC movie fans and Marvel movie fans.
right, right.
And I remember when The Dark Knight Rises came out, and there's a lot of legitimate criticisms of The Dark Knight Rises, even though I love that film. But there's a scene in The Dark Knight Rises where Batman escapes the pit. And there
Yeah,
was all these people online trying to, how did he get back to Gotham? This movie's stupid. You DC fanboys. You just, and I'm like, really? In a movie where Batman is Batman, the biggest quandary that can't get past is how did Bruce Wayne get back into Gotham City for the final fight? And
he's
you started
Batman.
having
Yeah,
that at that Mac. I think that was the first time you kind of saw it. What comic fans have done forever is you started having these MCU Marvel fans come at DC films from every angle, and so like you could tell they'd go sit and they'd watch the movie, and the goal was, what can I complain about? I'm gonna watch this in every frame. I'm looking for every single thing that I can complain about and go, see, this is why you DC fans are trash. And I think you had Marvel or DC fans who did that to Marvel certainly, and I think
I re-
Unfortunately, I think that's just kind of spread
I
everywhere,
remember
even though
that
I think that's always been a little present in the comic book fan.
I remember that era when Jackson was, 8, 9, 10, 11, and we would go see a movie that he really enjoyed. And then he'd come out of his room after 2 hours of watching on YouTube. But Dad, that movie was terrible. And I'm like, wait, he just had so much fun watching it. How is it bad?
Yeah.
And he will say, yeah, but then this and break down continuity, and that couldn't have really happened. I'm like, yeah, but Jackson, it's a superhero movie. It's a comic book story. And I'm like, stuff like that happens all the time in comic books. You just roll with it.
No, I think that's a huge piece. Is I do think it's funny. Me and you have done this on this channel. We've talked about older movies that we really liked. Like the we love them, you hate them sort of thing. The Hulk
Yeah,
movie from 2003 and Daredevil and the
yeah,
Phantom. And it's
yeah,
interesting is there's so many movies that I have went and saw, seen in theaters, and I walked out of the theater and go, man, that was pretty good.
yeah.
And then you go in the reception online, and that was trash. That was
You get
awful.
online and it's
Like
just like,
the
yeah,
the one example I'll point out, and I didn't even know this because I never looked it up. When I was a child, for some reason, I saw the movie Beverly Hills Cop 3 like
yeah,
700 times. We just owned a VHS of it. I
yeah,
must have watched that movie, and it's probably not the best movie for a kid to watch, but we watched. I must have watched that like 500 times. I loved that movie. I thought it was
yeah,
amazing. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. When
yeah,
I go up and look up Wikipedia, that movie, it's seen as like one of the worst sequels ever. People
yeah.
hate it. They say it like spit on the legacy of the first two movies in that series. And like for me now, like I'm like when I say I talk about that movie, there's a little bit of trepidation of like, yeah, I really like Beverly Hills Cop 3 because there's so many people who are like, that thing's one of the worst movies ever made. And I think that's a little bit of what happens now is you have that reception of comic book stuff where I do think there's a ability of people have now where it's like if you like something, you're kind of worried like if I say I like it,
Then
is
it
this
won't
going
be
to make me
cool.
seem like I'm selling out? And I
or
think
or I
it's
won't be cool. I won't be one of the cool kids anymore.
I also think from the critic where I think it's a double-edged sword is I think from the creative standpoint that's what's happened too. Is I do think creatives now have where if I admit that something I did failed and it did not work, then I'm admitting to these people that they were right. And so I think we've had kind of this weird pride thing break down where I think on the creative angle, you have some of these writers who I think have to have a little self-examination to look and go, geez, man, I'm writing Spider-Man or I'm writing X-Men and the sales used to be here and now they're here. It can't just be that all fans are bad, stupid people. It must be that maybe I'm not writing the greatest X-Men story or Batman story or Spider-Man story. And I just feel like, again, it's that polarization that we've seen where it's just extremes on both sides. And I think there's so many people who are kind of just caught in the middle where it's like, man, I just want a comic book to enjoy. And I think
Yeah.
that's the hard part of some of this is everything turns into these kind of pointless battles now where it's just people yelling at each other about everything.
The way I have dealt with it for the last several years is just to put the blinders on. I don't watch YouTubes about the movie I'm going to go see.
Mhm.
I don't consume content like ours because I'll just go to the store and I'll be happily
Stirring
surprised,
endorsement for the channel.
right? I used to watch a lot of comic book YouTube content. I liked Comic Historian, and
Comic story and rest in peace. He had a lot of great videos.
um,
Absolutely.
I really liked what was the other one? George turned me on to all of these.
Oh, what's a comics explain that Rob guy, right?
Comics Explained.
Yeah,
I
he's
loved
fantastic.
that. I loved that. But my time, my I have time
Yeah, I
limits.
know once the
I can't
jobs kick
spend a
up
lot
and
of time.
everything's there.
But also, I don't want to be spoiled for the actual event. I kind of want to look at it with fresh eyes because I know the media on both sides, the coverage is going to be so slanted.
Biased one way or the other. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
and
think that's the other
more
thing
often
we
than
do
not,
have.
it's biased in the bad way.
Well,
That's like really
I
prevalent,
think
and I don't like that.
I think there's two things you kind of touch on there that I think have impacted fandoms on things. The spoiler culture. I think it's unavoidable because of the online presence of everything. I do think what's happened in that though is you kind of get people who tell you what happened in something from their perspective. And there's a lot of people I think who never even pick the thing up themselves. And so, oh hey, the person that I watch on this thing said it sucks, therefore it's awful. And I don't even need to pick it up because it's the worst thing ever. And then I think you also have where, hey, I trusted this person, they said it's amazing, even though I didn't watch it, I'm gonna die on the hill of saying this is the most amazing thing ever. And I think that spoiler culture of everything being out there, you can find out everything that's happening in every single thing without a zero context. You kind of just see sometimes panels pulled out of context and stuff. And granted, there's a ton of stupid things happening in comic books. I'm not here to defend a lot of the dumber decisions that have been made, but I think that spoiler portion of things has really impacted a lot of culture. I think the other thing that's really difficult is I think, like you said, I think there's always just a bias one way or the other. I'll say this as a Star Wars fan, even though I have really kind of dwindled in my fandom on it. On Star Wars, it's impossible to find content breakdowns anymore that are not it's the worst thing ever or it's the greatest thing ever. It kind of seems like on content wise, you either get content that is this is the greatest Star Wars thing ever, or this is trash and it's awful and it's the worst thing ever. And like I just wish we had a little bit more moderation in things. Not saying we should ever silence anybody's opinion. I'm 100% against that. We should always have that people can say what they want to say. I think it's really been sad in the nerd space of things where this thing that's escapism largely. That's kind of, I think what has really been sad is I do think in the growth of you talked a little bit about appreciating the moment and where we've been as nerd culture. And, I grew up in the 90s, you were 70s. Right? In the 90s, it was still wasn't cool to be a comic book fan. It was one of those things where like, yeah, I remember having,
That was
girls I
rough.
was interested in or talking to at school. And I was like, they're not finding out I read Spider-Man. That's for damn
I
sure. Like,
know.
you're not you go see the movie with them on a date or something, and it's like I'm not going to pretend to be as excited as I actually am about what just happened because you don't want to get seen as a dork like that. And I think one of the things that's changed is I do think I'll be honest though, I do think the nerd culture was a little better back then. And that look, there's always been anger in the nerd culture, right? You look at Michael Keaton being Batman, right? That was perceived very, very poorly with a lot of people, even back then pre-internet. So we can't blame the internet for everything, right? That's always been a piece of this, an element of it. I think what's happened that I think is really sad is I think we've just had an influx of a lot of people who are just seeing the nerd culture thing as opportunistic because it became the thing of the moment. Right. And I
It
think comic
really
books
did.
has
That was
kind of had that.
amazing. That was amazing what happened in the 2000s because we gained all these new fans that, probably would have derided us in our
Yep.
earlier life, all of a sudden they appreciated the same things that we had all along for the first time.
I think the weird thing is I don't know how many of them actually did though. And this is the part that I'll kind of close this on. Um, I think it's great that we grow a new fandom. I think it's great to see new people get involved. What I will say I am slightly tired of is there's a lot of people in both the creative space and I think in the fandom space. And I think it's a little more on the creative side than on the fandom part, where these people didn't like this stuff. They don't like the fans of it. And their goal was, I'm going to come in and become a fan. And then my goal is to try to change it. And I've seen different ones that have had that happen. And I'll be honest, I kind of miss the time when it used to be a little less popular. And that while we get more content and it's great, I think we have a lot of people now where like somehow we're giving people jobs to write Batman who flat out say, I hate Batman. We'll give
That would
people
have
jobs.
never that would have never happened in
And
the old.
that's what I miss about older comics is I think if you'd ever had a writer go into Stan Lee's office and go, here's my Spider-Man story, and we're just going to humiliate Peter Parker. I feel like Stan Lee would have been like, you're not doing that. Get out of here. No,
Yeah,
you hate Spider-Man and you think you're going to work for Marvel Comics? No,
right.
get out of here. And I
Yeah.
think what we've had happen is we've had way too many people come into the nerd space and they didn't like the characters, and their comic books are almost a takedown or a destruction of these
Yeah.
characters
It's
and the
hard
fans
to
they have.
believe, but more and more I see what you mean. It's really hard for this fan to believe that anybody would get a job drawing Batman or Spider-Man that wasn't just,
One,
you
I
know,
think I think the companies themselves sometimes. I mean, the biggest one that has surprised me to date I very rarely ever root for failure for anybody on anything, but I was really happy to see that Kill the Justice League game kind of just completely faded. Because if you'd have ever
Me
told
too.
me that DC Comics was going to make a video game where you were going to shoot and kill all of the Justice League characters, urinate on their corpses in the cases of the Flash, mock and humiliate. If you would have ever told me that DC Comics and the property that owns them would have went, yes, make this, promote it, send it out to millions of people. Like, there's no way in heck they'd let that happen. And
Yeah.
to me, there's no way anybody who made that game has any love for any. I don't care what anybody says about, oh, it was a different game and I wanted to tackle it from the angle of the Suicide Squad. No, you didn't. You must have had a lot of dislike of those superheroes to put that in there. And I think
Yeah.
sadly, stuff like that has what's caused so much of the kind of stone throwing between both sides, so to speak. It's just sad. I really do. And again, I want to make sure it's very clear. I think it's great that people express their opinions. I got no problem with people. If you're negative and you don't like something, you absolutely should state your opinion. If you think something's awful, you should state your opinion. I just wish there was a little bit more tampering things down a bit in the way folks handle things, but we shall certainly see. I'm sure that me and Mike saying this is probably going to trigger the exact reaction from some in the comments. But we just wanted to talk about it a little bit because me and Mike have had so many conversations about just how, man, you go to the comic book shop or you know, seems like an angry place quite a bit with folks. And so we just want to kind of
Sometimes
give
it
our two
does.
cents on it.
It's like, then why'd you come
Yeah.
in? I don't know why you're here. I'm here to get my comics. I don't know what you're doing.
And as you said, there's always really cool comics to go check out in the past. I think that's one thing we'll say is we're going to always try to highlight the things that we do like. But I will say as well, there's always great stuff in the past. You know, like I was browsing through the store the other day. I found this old compendium of Batman Beyond comic books.
Oh, that's so
Totally
cool.
forgot about those. And there's just so many books like that that are from, you know, the 90s, the early 2000s that kind of slipped your mind or you didn't see or series you didn't pick up. And hopefully we'll be able to highlight those here as we kind of explore those and things like that. But as always, folks, let us know what you guys think below. We appreciate any opinion you guys express down below. If you think me and Mike are completely wrong, we're completely okay with you saying that down below. It's fantastic to see those. Sometimes it brings attention to stuff that we're not even aware of, and we always appreciate that. But
Absolutely.
let us know what you think. Hope you have a great rest of your day. God bless you, and we will catch you in our next video, folks.
Thanks, everybody.